we're going over tenant reports and leases. So when you guys have a rental and you have the tenant side, a lot of times people will ask for the credit reports and eviction statuses and a bunch of things, and they can be called something an NTN report. So if you ever see on the MLS at the bottom, it says must have NTN report. Tenant reports is the same thing. So we have an account with them as O'Brien Realty, and all of our agents can have access to it. You just need to let us know if you want to have access, and we'll set you up. What we'll do is we'll give you a username, which will be your email. We make up a random password that you can change once you sign in the first time. And then you have access to run all the different reports. So I'm just going to show you quickly how you can run them. So that way you guys have an idea of what exactly you're going to get. So if I log in, when you log in, you're going to get this screen, right? At the very top, you'll see something called order, and then you'll see a new order. So if I click new order, it's going to give me these choices. We typically tell everyone to run the $20 report, which it'll make your client pay for, so you're not paying the $20. However, there's a new option that Tenant Reports has started where you can do bank account verifications, but the only way to get that is to do this all products available version. Now, the difference between grabbing the package versus the all products is this is like an a la carte. So the $20 one includes the TransUnion credit scorecard, one statewide criminal and eviction status, and social security number verification. So if I go to the all products, I can click TransUnion, right? I can click social security verification, and then single state criminal search, single state eviction search. But then what it'll also give me is the bank verifications. And there are two different levels, so you can choose which level you want and have them run that. Now, if your clients don't do online banking, it's not going to bring anything back. But as long as they do online banking, then they're going to get, some sort of verification. And then at the very bottom here, there's a pass-fail scorecard. So we usually do that too, to make sure that it tells you whether or not they pass or fail based on how much the rent is a month and how much they make every month. So that's if you do the a la carte. Now, granted, you can choose more things for them to search, but the more you choose, the more you're tallying up. So right now, this would be $27.50, I believe, if I do the math right. So it's a little bit more than the $20 package, but you're getting, an extra piece of the puzzle. So if I hit quick app, that's going to be the next step. It's going to bring me to this page. There's only a few fields you need. They have the little stars. So you need to know what your client's monthly income is. So if they filled out the lease application, you should see what their monthly income is. So let's just say their monthly income is $2,000, right? Or I'm sorry, $5,000. Then it needs to know what the monthly rent is going to be. So let's say the monthly rent is $2,000. And then you just need their legal last name and their legal first name. So it's not going to be Tommy, it's going to be Thomas, right? Just make sure you guys do it that way. And then you'll need their email address. What it's going to do is it'll send them an email saying they've been invited to take this. It'll have them pay whatever the fee is, and then they'll put in all of their information, their private information, their social security numbers, all kinds of things like that, and you won't see any of it. You don't have to worry about any kind of liabilities. And you'll end up getting an email back, and I'll show you what one looks like, that has a PDF, and it gives you all of the information you checked off. So it'll give you the pass-fail, it'll give you what their scores are, it'll give you the eviction statuses, everything like that. The one caveat with this is if you say have more than one person applying. If more than one person is applying, you need to divide the monthly rent by however many people are going to be applying. So if say it's a husband and wife, then instead of 2,000, this would be 1,000, right? If it's 3 people, then you would do 2,000 divided by 3. So however many people are applying, that's how many people have to fill this out. And that's how many times you divide the rent by. Solely because if you do this as 2,000 for everybody, right? Say this person makes $5,000 a month. This person only makes $2,000 a month. Well, the person who only makes $2,000 a month is going to fail because they're going to think that they can't afford this. So that's why we do that. So does everyone understand that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, now I'm going to show you guys. So up here you have the tab that's reports. It'll show you if you have pending reports, if you have completed reports. I'm going to show you what the completed reports look like. So what happens is once they've done it, they'll end up in this bucket, but you'll also get an email that says that they did it. And you're going to be able to click this little PDF and it's going to show you the report, right? So it has the information down here. It has, you know, the scorecard. Why is this one weird? Let me do a more recent one. This was an old one. Let's do completed. Let's do maybe her. There we go. So you'll see all the different addresses that verify. They're going to verify the single state criminal search, right? They're going to verify the eviction search. Then down here you get the pass fail. So here's the proposed rent. This is what they say their monthly income is. The income to debt, income to rent debt ratio, income to debt, delinquent accounts if they have any delinquent accounts, any kind of collections, bankruptcies, and then it's going to tell you pass or fail, right? This is conditional because it's the credit score, so it's based on what your client wants, right? So then overall, it'll give you either a pass or a fail, or since this says conditional because of the score, that's what this is. Now, if somebody comes up with like a 750 credit score, this is likely going to say pass, not conditional. But because it's under 6, it's coming up as a condition because sometimes people don't like that. And then at the very top, there'll be just a little button that you can print it. And then you can print it as a PDF. So you can send it to your, to the landlord or the landlord's agent, whoever you're working with. And I'm just going to pop in here and type in report. It has attachment. Trying to find one that came in. I just wish I knew what email they came from. And reports. Here we go. So you're going to get this. It's going to say tenantreports.com completed report. So when you click it, it's going to say click this link and it's going to bring you to your login so you can log in and get the completed report. Does anyone have any questions about tenant reports? Do you guys feel comfortable?
Amy, I have a question. Do all landlords require this?
No, you'll usually say on the listing if they want, it'll say like NTN report because it's another website that does the same thing. Or it'll say, you know, they want their credit reports. So a lot of times, especially when they're working with agents, they'll ask for it because they'll be in the listing. If say you're working with just a landlord by themselves, they might just want a credit score. It just kind of depends on what they want.
Okay, but this is good to have just in case though. Thank you.
Yes. Does anyone else have any questions?
I would think if you were going to start working with a tenant, you would try to get this done, because if the tenant's looking to move within a month, it won't really get that old. So if you could get them to do it ahead of time. So if you were submitting a lease, or just even the lease application, if you're submitting the lease application, you would be able to attach the report right along with it instead of waiting for it to all be completed and get back. Because even though we know the rush that we need to be in when working with another agent that's representing a landlord, sometimes the potential tenants don't realize how much time is of the essence in these situations. So maybe a little bit advanced, getting it done when you're starting to look would be really prudent, and then you'd have it right then and there. And you can
And then
still do
also,
that.
if it does come up as a fail, just kind of look into why it failed, right? So at the very bottom where it has like pass, fail, look and see what it is that failed and talk to your client to see, because sometimes, for example, like I said, if you're doing 3 people, one person might come up as a fail because it might think that they can't afford it. But in the whole, you have 3 people who are paying for it, not that one. So even though it thinks that they can't afford it, if you were to do that with 2 other people, then yes, they can. So just make sure you don't just take that fail as like they can't do it, and that you actually look into why it's saying that they failed.
He said, not in the hospital, but, so I said, no problem, I'll find it. Okay.
Do you guys ever see this required for seasonal rentals, just for like a week or a month?
I actually have one we just ran 5 people on for a summer rental. So I don't know, they haven't done them yet. I just sent it yesterday, so I don't know how it's going to score them, because I had to divide it by 12 and then divide it by 5, so it got a little weird. So I'll let you know how it scores it, but I think this is geared more towards annual rentals, definitely.
Okay, and then if it was a couple for a week, I should run the husband and the wife, not just one of them.
So whoever's going to be on the lease has to run them.
Okay, thank you.
If you guys are good with tenant reports, what I'm going to say is if you want us to set you up on it, just send us an email. You can send it to the Carrie O'Brien team email, and we'll set you up with like your usernames, the temporary password and everything, so that way you're good to go. Because a lot of times what ends up happening is people don't realize they need it, and then they need it on a Saturday night and nobody's around to set you up. So we want to make sure that you guys have advanced access, so that way you're not in a pressure situation. But let's pop into .loop itself, and we can show you what the rental loops are going to look like. So I'm actually going to do it in here, so that way John has access to it too. So once you're in .loop, you're going to add a new loop, right? So if you're working with a client, you may have already started a loop and you may have named it like Jane Smith, right? Because you don't have a property yet, but you want to have them sign the CIS and everything. So in the meantime, you may have just created it under their name. For now, we're just going to pretend that we have a house. Oh, look at that. Let's pick this one, because this is .loop. We're going to hit continue, and when you get the loop templates, you're going to make sure you're choosing rental tenant, right? Because that's what you're handling. You're handling the tenants. So you're going to continue. If you want to upload a photo, you can. Going to make your loop, and it's going to pop up this. Now the status, it's going to be at the moment a pre-offer, right? Because you're just putting in your offer. And then the rental price, let's say we're doing that $2,000, right? And we're going to click it. Now it brings you in. It'll always bring in the .loop checklist, so you can always go by this to get yourselves comfortable, to make sure you always have the paperwork you need. It's going to bring in your lease application, the residential lease, the CIS, the Truth in Renting Handbook. Please make sure you send this to your clients. This is really important because they need to know what their rights are just as much as a landlord needs to know what their rights are. There have been plenty of times where we've had tenants not realize things that landlords are doing that are wrong. So just make sure you're sending this to your clients. And then of course the dual agency and the commission bill come in too. You don't necessarily have to use the commission bill for this. You can just archive it, because when the checks come in, they're going to be the security deposit check, right? And then they're going to be the first month's rent checks that you divvy up, typically, is how the annual rentals will be. So Micah understands it's not as complicated as when you do a sale where you need to know what the splits are and things like that. So you can just archive the commission bill. At the bottom here, you're gonna have the people. So you're gonna be able to add your client. Now, if you haven't added your client into Dotloop yet, do that underneath the people tab. So when you go into people and you go to contacts, you're gonna do add person and you're gonna add your client in here. Reason being is it'll save them into Dotloop. So anytime you ever need to access them, you can put them into 1,000 loops. If you do it in the loop, then, whoops, 123 Main Street. There we go. If you do it in here, they're only saved to this loop. So then if, say, this doesn't work out and you have to do another one, you're gonna have to add all their information all over again. So it just makes more sense to add them into the people tab. So I'm just gonna, and I'm gonna make them the tenant and hit add. Then you can open up the paperwork, right? Let's say we open up the lease. There we go. Open. So you're gonna get the autofill, right? And when you get the autofill, it's gonna say listing agent. So make sure that you're assigning yourself. I'm just gonna put O'Brien Realty for right now since I'm in there. And you're gonna make sure, oh, I'm sorry. The listing agent should populate when you put in the listing, because once you put in the property, it's gonna pull from the MLS. So the listing agent will populate in. Tenant agent, make sure you make yourself the tenant agent. And then tenant, make sure your client's assigned as the tenant. The address, make sure that's correct. Make sure the rent is right? And then make sure your tenant's info is right. And then you hit autofill and it starts to populate the information. Now the lease application gets filled out by your client. So when you send this to your client, you're gonna send this as can fill and sign, because they have to fill their employer out. They have to fill their occupation, their income, all of this information they fill out. Their references, things like that. You're not gonna have any of that information, so they're gonna fill that out. And then at the very bottom, this part I might do. So if the brokerage fee is being paid, they're being paid by the landlord. The security deposit, when that's due by. The lease deposit, so that is the security deposit. I usually will write security deposit just to be, extra specific. So if this is what, 2,000, so it'd be 3,000. It's a month and a half, right? So I usually will write that in. Things like that, they're not gonna know, so you can put that in. There's no application fee. And then this down here is saying if we run a credit check for them, that it's gonna charge this amount. So since we don't do that, that's $0 because they pay for it on their own. And then down here, just make sure the applicant's there. And then your information for the office is here. And then here's the lease. This is, I know, what John mainly wants to go over, just because I know sometimes people have a little confusion with filling these out. So John, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you. Let me take over and share my screen and pull it up.
I'm just gonna pop out of it, so that way it lets you go in there.
And
Stop share.
of course, it's not here, so hold on just 1 second while I pull it back again. All right. Okay, here we have the lease. And as as important as the contract for sale is, there are items in this document that are extremely important to know and understand to make sure and protect your tenant, as well as also making sure the landlord understands full well that this is a really thorough contract, because there's some landlords that have said, well, they don't want to use this, they want to use their own contract. If we're working with the client, we really need to make sure that they have the state form, because that's what we do. So when you're going to prepare a lease, make sure you highlight, and as I go through here, I'll say certain things that you want to make sure and ask the other agent to get that information before you fill this out, instead of just popping things in, because there may be certain requirements that the landlord is asking for. So again, if you did the autofill, you should have here the landlord and the tenants. If you didn't, write those in. This section 1 is really important if you are renting a condo or a co-op, because it's very clear, you need to make sure that the tenant understands this, that their tenancy can be terminated with a 60 days notice if the unit is being sold. So normally the lease survives the closing. So if you sell, they would be responsible. However, this lease puts in place that if the owner sells the property, that it being a condo or a co-op, that then because somebody else is going to use it as their personal home, that the tenant then does have 60 days notice. Now, again, there is a clause in here that if the landlord fails to complete the sale after the tenant has moved out, and then they try to rent it to somebody else, that tenant can take the landlord to court, and the landlord is liable for treble damages, or triple the amount of the damages that they would have paid, basically. And the damages usually is a security deposit, but they can be even more if it caused hardship on the tenant. Okay, number 2, we're looking at the property. And again, here it's just the apartment number, condominium number, townhouse, or street address, very simple. Number 3 is the term. Make sure you are completing this very thoroughly. Is a term in months. If it's a winter rental, is it 9 months? If it's a summer rental, is it 3 months? Is it 1 month? Is it, or if you're doing it in years, starting on the very, very specific date and ending on a specific date. Make sure that when you're doing that, you have the years correct as well, if it's crossing over. One of the issues that we kept seeing in listing agreements, somebody would list something in October of 2020, and it was going to expire, the listing was going to expire, say in February, they would put February 2020. So just make sure that you're making sure that you're changing the years as well. And usually it's giving a little note here if the landlord fails to give possession of the property. And again, this is important to your tenant. If the landlord fails to give possession of the property within 30 days of the start date set forth, then the tenant can terminate the lease, giving the landlord notice. But key is they should agree on the date of move-in. If that is delayed, the end of the lease moves as well. So if your lease was March 1 to February 28th, and they didn't get occupancy until March 5th, then that ending date has the ability to move as well. So it doesn't cheat the tenant, and that's what it calls for in this section. as well as the tenant should not pay their rent until they actually take occupancy of the property. I've seen and heard of landlords wanting to collect the rent before the tenant moves in because they need to make repairs so the tenant can move in. Well, their rent is not for that. So the landlord should have that taken care of. And I've seen where that's happened, and then the tenant didn't get possession the first of the month because the landlord didn't get the repairs made and didn't get the CO in time. So the tenant had paid a full month's rent and didn't get possession on the first of the month, and it experienced a little bit of a hardship there. So again, protect your tenant and make sure that they understand that clearly. And when you're working with the other party, make sure you get a clear move-in date, possession date. Rent, here again, we're talking about what the term is, and the term of the lease is, and the term of the lease, if it's $1,000 for 12 months, then the rent for the term of the lease is $12,000. So that's the total amount due over the course, and it's going to be paid as follows. It's going to be paid $1,000 a month, which is due on, and here's something you want to make sure we all assume it's due on the first day of the month, but always ask. If they're moving in on the 15th of the month, will their rent be due on the 15th of the month every month? And find out exactly who the rent is going to be payable to. Is it going to be payable to the owner? Is it going to be payable to an LLC? To make sure and get that correct. Number 5, the initial deposit. Tenant has paid an initial deposit of blank. That you want to, oftentimes it's like paying this so your tenant gets a hold on the apartment. They're willing to pay this. It could be the full amount of the security deposit, 1.5 months rent. It could be 1 month's rent with the other half month with other portions of security deposit coming at a later date. It could be the full, it could be a half month, whatever is agreed upon. But again, this should be discussed with the other agent, how they prefer this and how your client is willing to, do they have the money to do this? And received on the date and credited towards, and you want to say, are they crediting towards the first month's rent or to the security deposit? If it's being credited to the security deposit, make sure you put an NA there in that blank for the first month's rent. And then the balance of the first month's rent is going to be paid and due on the day that they're going to take possession. And the security deposit due on, did they pay the full security deposit above received on date? Then put that same date in there. The next one, number 6, security deposit. Just a couple things, and again, this is important to go over with your tenant and the landlord to make sure they're very clear and understand this. The security deposit in the state of New Jersey is only allowed to be 1.5 months rent. So anything that's called a deposit, so let's say they have a pet and the landlord requires a pet deposit. If they're requiring a pet deposit of 1 month's rent, they can't then charge another security deposit of 1.5 months rent, because now that violates the law. They're taking a deposit of 2.5 months rent. So if they do 1 month's security deposit, 1 month's rent security deposit, and a half-month rent pet deposit, then that is satisfactory. That meets the 1.5 months rent threshold. So be very cautious with that. If there's a pet situation, and you're working with the landlord and you're working with the tenant, it's much better if the landlord would charge an extra $100 a month for that, for the pet or an extra $50 a month for the pet instead of trying to take security deposit, because they're going to have to prove, if they took a pet deposit, they're going to have to prove that the pet did damages that they had to use that deposit for when before they return or don't return the deposit money. So it's very convoluted. It unfortunately for tenants, it ends up as like it's automatic loss of a pet deposit because the landlord says, well, I have to clean extra, etc., because you had the pet. So that kind of like almost automatically you're losing that part of your security deposit, which I don't think is fair for the tenant. Now, also it describes in here, which is really important to make sure to let your tenant know, that they need to get notice from the landlord where their security deposit is being held. And they have to know this within 30 days of giving that security deposit. So the landlord has to put that security deposit in a New Jersey bank or lending institution, a credit union, etc., will work. But they have to put that in, a banking institution or investment company in the state of New Jersey. And they have to notify the tenant in name, the name, address, and the account number of where their security deposit is being held, even the current rate of interest that it's being held under. All right. Now there is a caveat here, and you want to know, unless the lease is for an owner-occupied property with not more than 2 rental units, or is a seasonal tenancy of not more than 125 consecutive days. So any attempt to waive the requirements of the act is prohibited and void as a matter. So key thing, if it's a short-term seasonal rental 125, then you don't have to worry about the security deposit and the amount of security deposit, where it's being held, etc. But when it goes over that 125 consecutive days, or if it's an owner-occupied unit, it does follow different rules. So just make sure and review that with your tenant so they understand. Now, late payment penalty. Before you do this, fill this in, make sure and ask the other agent what their landlord wants. When does he want the rent due by? Is it the first day of the month? If the tenant doesn't pay the rent by, is the landlord giving them a grace period? In this situation, if the tenant does not pay the rent by the, say you put in 5th day of the month, one thing to advise your landlord, this basically automatically gives that tenant permission to pay their rent on the 5th of every month instead of paying it on the 1st of every month that was agreed. So if I was representing a landlord, I would say that all the rent has to be due on the 1st, and there would be a late charge. Again, what is the late charge that they're going to ask? Is that a late charge of $50? Is the late charge of $100? There's no regulation on that. And what are they going to charge if the tenant writes a bad check? Is it a $50, $100? What? Justine asked, how is the max security deposit for a short-term seasonal rental calculated? There is no max or minimum security deposit on a seasonal rental. A seasonal rental being $125 or 125 days or less. There is not like 1.5 weeks or anything. So whatever the security deposit is asked for. So there is no regulation on that, to my knowledge. I've never come across it in all my years of real estate and teaching real estate. There's never been anything with security deposit because it's mostly just due for annual rent. Additional rent. Landlord may perform any obligations under this lease with the tenant's responsibilities. And if the tenant fails to perform, the cost to the landlord, such performance may be charged to the tenant as additional rent. That's where that additional rent comes in, is if that late fee is paid, that is considered additional rent, not a late fee. All right. Possession and use. Here it's very, very straightforward. The landlord's allowing the tenant to occupy this property and lease it. The tenant is under the understanding and agreement that it is going to be a private residence. They're not going to use it for business, trade, or any type of professional type office, etc. So is very key, and not going to store anything flammable or any hazardous materials, you know, other than the ordinary cleaning materials. So, and also the property shall not be allowed to be vacant for an extended period of time. Some landlords actually have an addendum to that if the property, the rental unit is vacant for 30 days or more without notice, they can cancel the lease. And again, here this possession and use allows them to use some of that language there. All right, number 10, utilities. The tenant shall arrange to have the utilities transferred into the tenant's names. Now again, always make sure, double check. The MLS will say one thing, but the MLS is not always correct. So again, double check with that agent. Double check if you're representing the landlord, double check with the landlord exactly what is going to be taken care of. Normally it's gas, electric, heat, general trash disposal, and other would be, say, cable, Wi-Fi, etc. It's not very often that water and sewer are included in. However, doesn't say that it cannot be. If it's a single family home, they can get the water bill, water and sewer. It's very difficult to change the water account and the sewer account into the tenant's names. So that may have to be the landlord gets the bill and present it to them. But that should be made clear. And then again, what the landlord agrees to pay for. One of the things that does arise that does get overlooked is this general trash disposal. Please make sure, because in times like these, when tenants are putting out the trash, or they're not putting out the trash because they don't know if it's being picked up and it's just being left out in a yard or something like that, the municipality can come by and can fine the owner of the property for the garbage. So make sure that that's emphasized, that who's going to take care of that general trash disposal every week. And if it is the tenant's responsibility, make sure that the landlord has provided them with a method of disposing of that and helping them understand when the garbage pickup times are. All right, I have another question here. Oh, there's just thank you from Justine. You're welcome, Justine. All right, no assignment or subletting. This is really an important issue. This clause says that that tenant is not allowed to assign the lease to anybody else. They are the ones that are in permission. They cannot sublease, they cannot assign. Now, the landlord could allow them to do that if they have written permission. Sometimes there, you know, things that are out of the tenant's control. You know, they got a job transfer and they need to break their lease. You know, and if they can arrange it, if they can work with the landlord to get their place re-rented so the landlord isn't losing out and assign the lease over to them, it's a win-win for both, because then the tenant can potentially get back the security deposit and the new tenant can move in and there is not a problem. But remember, it's not an automatic, and let the tenant know that the best thing is to talk to the landlord about this. Violations, eviction, and reentry. The landlord has the right to reserve right of reentry in this property. And that is understandable. Even in COVID, the landlord does have a right to enter the building. But they must give firm notice in entering. There must be a 24 hours notice unless there is an emergency. The landlord can terminate the lease and regain possession of the property. But again, this is done by a court proceeding known as eviction. And the landlord must serve upon the tenant a notice to quit. And that means they're terminating and they're evicting them. If the tenant does not move out at that point, then the landlord can take them to court and attempt to get the eviction processed. But all the time that this is going on, the tenant may not pay their rent. So understand the landlord may be in for a challenge if they're going to evict them. Right now, we're still in a situation under the state and under the federal law, because of COVID, we can't evict tenants because they may not, especially evict them because they can't pay their rent. They were allowed to use their rent to pay or use their security deposit, to pay their rent, and now they don't have anything. Now you have them occupying the property without paying rent. Unfortunately, you can't take them to court to have them evicted. It's just a problem with the system. But if their lease ends, you can certainly tell them that you're not renewing their lease because of lack of payment. That is not eviction. That is their lease has expired and it's not renewed. In the state of New Jersey, every individual, every landlord must offer a renewal to the tenant unless the tenant has violated rules and it is documented that they have violated certain rules of tenancy. Otherwise, they must offer them a new lease. It doesn't say they have to offer them the new lease at the same rental amount. There is not even true specific limits on rental increase. All it says in the law is reasonable. So a lot of people think 10% is the max a landlord can raise rent. 10% is a nice number, but that's not what any of the law books say. Law books say reasonable. So if you really wanted the tenant out, maybe a little more than reasonable increase in rent might make them think. And if they're going to pay it, well, maybe is it that bad that they stay? Damages, again, the tenant is liable for damages that they cause to the landlord's apartment. Key here with damages, any damages that happen while the tenant is in occupancy, the landlord cannot pull from their security deposit to fix those items. Cannot do that. However, any damages, including the loss of rent, the cost of preparing the property for re-entering, and the brokerage commission incurred finding a new tenant, that can come from the tenant's security deposit if the tenant moves out prior to the end of the term. So if the tenant's in there and they break a window, you really want to take it out of the security deposit because it's their fault. However, unfortunately, you cannot do that. You have to make the repair. Quiet enjoyment is an odd term, but it is a term that you truly need to understand. Quiet enjoyment means that the tenant has a right to live there without any risk to their safety. And that's basically it. If the home is not kept in the proper condition, then they're not being allowed to live in quiet enjoyment. Also, the landlord cannot constantly be coming in, once or twice a month to check on things. Again, that's not quiet enjoyment either. That's interference with the landlord. All right. Tenant repairs is quite lengthy. So as I've done in the past with going over these leases and these contracts, I want to make sure that we have sufficient time to go over them and discuss them. And tenant repairs and maintenance, as well as landlord repairs and maintenance, is really important. And I don't want to rush it through in just a short period of time we have. So as we did with contracts, we will do with the residential lease. This will be a two-parter. So next week, join in for part 2 of the tenant of the residential lease. If there are any questions on what we've gone over so far, I will fill those now. Anybody have any questions on what we started out with? Okay, I guess you all understand it perfectly clear, as well as you should now. And of course, if you don't do a lease in 6 months, I know if it was me, you all could be a lot smarter than me, but I know if it was me, I'd probably forget it if I don't use it. And that's understandable. So our plan is to get these recordings posted. We've just got to get the YouTube channel set and get it posted, and we will notify anybody. In the meantime, if you want a recording of this, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and I will send you the recording so you have it and you can go through it, especially with the tenant reports credit check. In the meantime, join us next week and maybe try to review the rest of it. So if there are any questions as we're going through, if something seems unfamiliar, look through the entire lease, and so we can field those questions and we can make sure and get everything answered. Because again, it is a legal contract that you're entering in, and unfortunately, landlords like to not only take it out on the tenant, but they like to take it out, come after the agent as well. And I'm going to tell you, I have seen it happen. I have seen a landlord come after an agent because of the tenant's irresponsibility. It's not our responsibility, but one of the things we really do need to make sure is clarify everything to our tenant. Okay. Thank you, Marguerite, for that comment. Anybody else? Have a great day. I will see you next week at the Dot Loop Hour, and we will do part 2 of the residential lease. Thank you all for coming today. Have a great day.
Thank you.